Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. Today, we're going to dig into what to do when emotions are hot and you're in the middle of conflict. I'm with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove, and we're going to look at this topic because I'm guessing the reason you're here is because you're a Christian man or woman and you are struggling to figure out how to do your marriage in a way that glorifies God and doesn't make you half nuts. This is hard stuff. And so we're going to peel back some of the layers. We're going to look at conflict. We're going to look at emotions today. And we're going to explore, how do you do this well and not like get run over in the process? We don't espouse anybody becoming a doormat. And yet at the same time, we're called to live as Christ. Like, what does that even mean? Lay down your life. But, so we're going to figure some of that out today as we start diving in here. So Kyle, my guess is the majority of the couples that come see you, I know for me, this is true, they're in the middle of conflict or they have a lot of conflict and they don't know how to navigate it. True or not?
Was that a question?
No, it actually was kind of a statement. So, yeah, there's that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Fortunately on occasion we get the individuals or the couples that come in and they just want to be better than they are. And they are fewer and further in between than the ones that are already in the midst of conflict that they can't seem to navigate together. Mm-hmm. So I was curious, as you said a while ago, something about glorifying God without being or going half nuts. And I was going to say, if you can do pretty much anything around these days and not only be half nuts, you've done pretty well, actually.
Yeah. The world has lost its ever-loving mind for sure.
Oh, my word.
Yeah. So when people come into your office and they're dealing with conflict, there's probably some consistent themes in that. What do you usually see?
One of the big themes I see is people thinking that they understand what it means to be open-minded when they don't. Mm. And they think that if I hear you out, if I sit with you and make eye contact with you while you talk to me, that means I'm being open-minded. And it really doesn't. Being open-minded means I'm willing to change my mind. Mm. I don't think I need to, but I'm willing to if what you have to say resonates. So that's one big thing. Another big thing is people that don't know how to do conflict. They don't know how to confront one another and walk through the processes of resolving an issue. And the main reason they don't know how is because they can't seem to get off of the idea that there has to be a winner and a loser. Mm-hmm. And we've talked about this a half dozen times, I'm sure already. Winning or losing or being right and being wrong. If we continue through a confrontation with that in mind, then everybody loses.
Well,
every time.
Like they come in with accusation as that harsh startup. That's their go-to. That's a child's way of doing conflict. You took my ball, whatever it is. There's accusation right out of the gate. Then that never works. Like the data's there. So when people come into conflict and they're all like, emotions have a huge role in all of this hot mess. What do you typically see in a couple?
I have never once in 31 years as a therapist ever seen a couple come in the midst of a conflict totally unemotional.
Me neither.
Ever.
Although I have never been a therapist and I'm a coach now. I haven't been one for as long as you are.
Yeah.
So what do you think that's about?
It's about, well, we should just start a list, and it's going to be longer than our arm of what that could be about. And it's about misunderstanding. It's about miscommunication. It's about misinterpretation. It's about disappointment. It's about not meeting up to expectations. It's about 1,000 different things. Excuse me. But the one thing that we can point to, and that I think we've already highlighted, is that when people finally get to the point of saying we need some help, is that the engine's running hot. Mm-hmm. The radiator's about to blow over, and maybe it has had a little bit of blowing over already. And nobody likes that kind of heat. So it's time to figure out what are we not doing that we need to be doing? What are we doing that we're not doing well? And but I think that the idea of there's a lot of emotion hanging around, there's floating around, being thrown around, whatever it is, it's around.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily round, but it is
Oh, yeah.
around. And it needs to be minimized at that time. This is not the time for big emotion. Even though the issue may be one that's significant, when we begin the process of learning to confront issues appropriately with resolution in mind,
Mhm.
rather than winning or being right,
Oh, yeah.
then we've got to minimize the emotion. We've got to bring it down to a level that we can operate not emotionless and not emotion free, but with emotion not being the driver of that situation. And
Well,
that's a hard
and
thing to do.
it is really hard. And people don't understand that their emotions don't determine what's true or determine what should happen. We have emotions over lots of things that aren't even relevant to the now that we're in. Matter of fact, the majority of that stuff comes from false belief systems that we have and lies that we believe. And then on top of that, hurts that we've had. Like we take things and we use them as a filter, and we don't even know that we're doing that. We've seen a lot of people, when they work on their emotional health, be able to interact in their relationships at a much more effective level because the emotions are not in the way. We look at those as cues for something to interact with and deal with, because emotionality is not like, don't sin in your anger. Be quick to listen, slow to speak. Like that's really good advice, because if we're quick to listen, we may not even be hearing what we think we're hearing. We're listening to ourselves or our emotions, usually right out of the
Exactly.
gate. Yeah.
We're created as emotional creatures.
Mhm.
And I happen to believe, and I think most people do, that before we were thinking logical creatures, we were emotional creatures. We didn't have to be taught to put thoughts together and to produce an outcome. We do have to be taught, I'm sorry, to put thoughts together and produce an outcome. We didn't have to be taught to be afraid.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have to be taught to be angry. We don't
Mhm.
have to be taught to be so many things that our emotions just are. Our emotions just are.
Mhm.
But we do have to be taught how to use our thoughts, to place them together, to make them coherent, to make them logical. And so although we do both emotion and logic quite well when we need to, the base of who we are is emotional. The base and where we all start is practically all emotion. And to develop beyond that place, to either have a healthy balance of emotion and logic, or to be a more logical thinker than I am an emotional feeler, I have to learn that.
Yeah.
It's not always an intentional learning process. A lot of times it's what and what someone has modeled for me, or what I absorb. And so much of how we communicate with each other has to do with mirroring things that we have seen before and things that we've been a part of from people who are important to us in the foundation of who we are.
Yeah. So we're basically just kind of on autopilot in that space, reacting as things have been mirrored or reflected to us. We pick that up, we do the same thing. And that's often super not useful. And we honestly, you can look at that as if it's like a destructive cycle. Let's just keep playing this game that never worked and doesn't work now. Let's just keep doing that. But when you come in as an adult in that space, it puts a screeching halt on all of that. And I don't want to define adults as unemotional people, but they certainly have self-control of those.
They do it. I think people who handle adulting well
Mhm.
are the ones. Isn't it funny? We've given adulting, have turned that into a verb.
I know, right? How sad is that?
I don't know. I kind of like it. I don't like the
do
reasons
too,
for it,
actually.
but they're probably no different than the reasons before. We've just tagged it differently. But I think people who are more successful at adulting are the ones who are able to separate the thinking from the emotion and know that one at one point or another is more important than the other. For instance, in the midst of a conflict, if we are going to get to a place where we can resolve, the person who is going to operate in an adult ego state, so to speak, is going to be the one that says, timeout. Everybody take a breath. Maybe we need to take some time. But the time is not so we can go get a better strategy.
Right.
So that we can win better. The time is so that we can allow our emotions to settle. That's what it needs to be. Eric Berne was a Canadian sociologist who developed the communication theory of transactional analysis. And in the process of rolling this out, he determined that when we interact with one another, we typically do it from one of three ego states. We either interact from a child ego state, from the ego state of a parent, or from the ego state of an adult. Now, aren't parents adults? Most of the time, yes.
So define ego state for me here. So is that like identity, or like, what does that mean?
Great question. In both the parent and the child ego states, how we find ourselves there is we begin mirroring things that we've experienced in the past. The parent ego state refers to behaviors and thoughts and feelings that we copy.
Okay.
We learn those or even borrow them from our parents, other parental figures, or significant people that were, around when we were watching and soaking all this up. Okay, so we heard how our parents communicated and interacted with one another, and typically that's how we do it as well. Sometimes we are able to make conscious decisions when we said in our past, I will never do that when I'm an adult.
Yeah.
And then when we become a parent, I remember crying in my closet because I said, I will never say because I said so.
Oh,
5 minutes later, I am in the closet in my bedroom crying because I just broke a huge promise to myself and my children.
Yeah.
The child, on the other hand, is not acting childish or what others would perceive as being childish, but it's how we behaved and how we thought and how we felt being replayed in terms of how we interact with others. So it's another mirroring scenario. And that's how we fall into the parent and the child ego states. And those are the most natural ones for us to work out of. But there's this adult ego state. And that's the one I'd like to kind of point out here in terms of walking through a conflict and being able to manage and navigate emotion at the same time. Because like we said, somebody has to be the adult in the room, or at least the one who pulls this trigger and says, time out, stop for a minute. We want to be okay when this is resolved. Yeah. And if we're going to be okay, we got to stop, using things, words, objects as weapons against each other. And people who are operating in the adult ego state don't do that. And here's why. I'm going to actually read this because I want to make sure I get it right. The adult ego state operates, I'm not going to read it, I know this stuff. The adult ego state operates out of three different dynamics. Number one is the here and now. Okay, not the past, not what I'm afraid is going to happen in the future, but right now. It operates based on facts, not assumptions, not fears, and not what my neighbor said, but things I know to be true. And then it also operates by processing the situation with logic or being rational. Okay, now here's the part where it gets a little dicey, because it may be that one of us in this couple operates primarily logically while the other operates primarily emotionally. And we don't want to put down what it is or how it is that we operate the best. We have to understand sometimes it's not the best thing for the situation.
Well, and I think people have triggers, and then regardless of who you are, I mean, men's brains are more systematic than women's are in general, but there's plenty of women that are CPAs and analytical and all of that. So, So it's a spectrum, but in general, men's brains are more logical in that space. But
thank you. I was trying not to be the one to say that, so I appreciate you
it's
taking that
true.
on.
I mean, there's nothing offensive about that. I
No,
happen to
there's not.
think my observations and my relational skills are a superpower. Like, I see things relationally that the men in my life don't always see. And I don't really like spreadsheets, so I'm really okay with how
And
this
you can't see those
divides.
things without that you are an empath, which is emotional
Yeah,
at its
but
core.
I'm not overly emotional. Like, I'm not out. I don't have a lack of control of my emotions. That's kind of what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
And you see men that don't have control over their emotions, that are over the top angry, and that's not okay. And you see women that are over the top afraid or angry, and that's not okay. Like, or men, nobody's got nobody's written and stolen the book on emotionality. Like, both genders have their issues with this stuff. But
Right.
when it comes to solving problems, we both need to be in this space where we can be mature adults, because the over the top emotionality destroys the whole process. Right.
Sure. And when we focus on two ways, number one, we focus so hard on the problem that we neglect to see possible solutions. The other is that we try to get to the solution phase just based on the emotion that's driving us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've got to clear out that space. We've got to clear out that space of any hurts that have already been experienced through this conflict. We have to clear out that space of what Byrne referred to as unconscious contamination.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is where I want to really be clear, okay? Because he believes the unconscious contamination, and I think just in a cut and dried communication scenario, he's right. But we have to be careful with how we say this. The unconscious contamination to be an adult to adult communicator is emotion. And I don't want to always think that emotion is a contamination, because it's not.
Well, Jesus wept. Like, he had to have emotion for that to occur. Right.
But too much of the wrong kind of emotion doesn't work in a conflict resolution scenario.
Correct.
Okay. Too much intensity, too much anger, too much fear, too much hurt. We've got to be able to navigate those, or be able to put them aside, so that hopefully the way we go about resolving the conflict is going to eliminate some of those emotions.
We have this process in all of our courses that we teach called the connection steps. And it uses science, but also, it's mirrored in Psalms, basically, where you name the emotion you're experiencing, you normalize that. And those two actions in of themselves, help you interact with that emotion. And then you receive some comfort from the Lord about it. So you're talking to him about what you're feeling. Like, if you read the Psalms, that's what David was doing in a lot of those times. He went from, I'm going to murder everybody. How long is it going to take you to destroy my enemies? Like, he's hot and angry and hurt,
yes.
and blah, over the top. And then by the end of him, he's like, but you're God and I worship you. He's all right. We don't know how many days it took to write those, but we do know that he moved from being emotional down to being logical over and over and over again. And so those things taper as the intensity comes down, but through that process, you have to interact with it. There is absolutely no good that comes from stuffing emotions or pretending that they're not real, right? In your partner or yourself, if you just glaze over all of that stuff, like, no, you need to interact with it. And if it's a good time to do that, great, do that first. But if you can't, let's take a break so that we can both go our separate ways and get our brains in alignment with, who we actually are, because we lose our minds. And then let's get back together after we've gotten emotional control and I can be a grown-up again,
And there's room here for compassion.
Yes.
Okay. Because as we resolve and as we walk through and work through, it's important that we understand that our partner has feelings and emotions that are different than ours.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And even though I might not be able to pick that emotion up and wear it like my partner does, I have to understand that they have it, and that's important to them.
Yeah.
And in a way, maybe, part of a security blanket for them. I can't discount it. So as we walk through the resolution, working it out and walking it out, it becomes imperative that I have the compassion for my partner because of their emotion, and don't just completely bulldoze my way through saying we got to do this completely void of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be completely logical, and emotion has no place here. That's not true at all.
Right.
Because we have to be compassionate and understanding with one another. We have to be able to look at one another and say, I not only want the best outcome for me, I want the best outcome for you. And hopefully I want it for you first.
And no
I want the
loser
best outcome for
policy.
us.
Yeah. No
And that
losers.
requires compassion. That requires kindness.
Mm-hmm.
That requires that we treat each other the way we promised to, and the way we promised God we would treat one another in those things we call vows, and in other situations as well.
Yeah, that's rich. And remembering all of that and keeping it in front of us is a good place to be when we're solving conflict. It matters to get, like, I had somebody years ago say, well, God created me with these emotions, and I just need to experience them, and people around me need to, they're the problem because they're not emotional at all. And it's like, you might be borderline or something. Like you're when you're screaming and sobbing over things that aren't even a newspaper that you read, an article, and it's tipping you over to that extreme. It's like, what is that about? And then is it really reasonable, which is probably a logic word, to expect the people that you live with to go on a roller coaster ride with you every single day? Like, no, you're not going to have the connection and the unity with the people in your life if you're up and down all over the place like that. Like, having emotional mastery is where wisdom lives. Let's just call it that too, because that's
I
what's
love
true.
it. I love
dig
that.
into Proverbs, you get three people. You got the evil person. He's motivated by hate. That's an emotion. You got the fool. He's motivated by stupidity. That's that's just being unwise and being addicted to happy, probably, right? And then you've got wisdom, which is where the balance of all of what we're talking about lives. And we want to be that. We want to experience what God's got for us: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness. But that comes through some self-control as well. So,
yeah, and don't feel like, I don't want anyone to feel like, okay, so to be okay, I have to have this perfect balance of logic and emotion. No, we want to be balanced, but we also want to be who God made us to be.
mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's any different in when it comes to logic versus emotion than it comes to a leadership style. We're going to be able to operate out of different quadrants or different spaces, but we're going to lean more toward one than the other. Most of us are.
Yeah. And I think marriage is awesome because it brings two people that are a little bit different in that space. Even if they're both emotional people, they have different spaces where they're logical. They have different spaces where they're emotional. And so I think it's cool how that pairs up. I notice that my husband can be logical when I need him to be, when I'm too emotional about something. And we're packing up our house and doing all this stuff to make this move. And
better you than me.
Oh, don't you just hate moving? Like, it's one of those stressor things on the list. It's awful. And well, we've been here for 25 years. So there's a lot of, memories, stuff. Like, it's a little emotional for me to be going through some of this stuff. And I got overwhelmed the other day, and I went downstairs and I said, okay, I just need you to tell me that it's going to be okay. I'm going to talk for about 27 seconds and you're just going to say it's okay. And he goes, it's okay. I said, no, I need you to wait until I've said
until I say it.
Yeah. I think he was just agreeing with me, but I just kind of
whatever it is, it's going to be okay.
Yeah, it's all okay. And so I just kind of
good husband
had this moment where I just needed to, tip the valve on the pressure cooker a little bit, because I'm trying to work full time, write a book, and pack up our house. And then there's all this emotional stuff with, oh, my daughter's ballet slippers. Like, oh my gosh, stop. Like, it's overwhelming. And so I did all of that. And he said, and he looks at me and he goes, it's going to be okay. And I said, okay, can you say it again? He goes, Nina, it's going to be okay. Have you eaten? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? And I'm like, oh, you know what? I am. And he said, yeah, take care of yourself. Take a little time, take care of yourself. It's okay. It's going to be okay. You're good at this. And you've been working really hard. You've got a lot done.
And have you slept in the last week?
Yeah, well, actually I have. I've been pretty good up until yesterday. And I just had a little moment, and but his logic, like he wasn't stressing with me. Like I didn't spin him up too.
Good.
You know, he was just able to be calm in that, and it was awesome. And I've done the same for him, when like we've raised 2 boys and 1 teen girl. 2 of our kids were kind of had some emotional drama, creatives, wonderful people, right? So and there's been times where I've said, okay, sweetheart, this is the part where you breathe, and you just don't, this is going to pass. It's all good, So we've kind of held each other up through some of these things, but that's why God designed families the way that he did.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I don't want us to stop today without completing a thought.
Mm.
And that is that, I'm talking about somebody has to be the person to kind of like your husband was.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just clear the deck.
Yep.
Okay. Let's go through our checklist and make sure the logical, rational things. But how God allows us to be different, one more emotional than the other, one more rational and logical than the other, and to balance each other
Mm-hmm.
with those differences.
Yeah.
Not for one to dominate the other with one or the other,
Or
but
be
to
better
balance
than.
each other, to be there, to be emotional for me when I'm struggling to do that because all I can do is think through something and it just doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
To be logical for me if I'm freaking out over or something and I'm letting my emotions have free reign, and then she can come to me and say, hey, stop a minute, breathe,
Breathe.
let's think this through.
Yeah.
So for the way that God allows good marriages and all marriages actually to have the capability of that balance and of that, I don't agree with the movie and the line, you complete me. Okay. But that's about as close to getting up to that line as I think we can get, is being there for each other and being something for the other that is not it's not our jam. It's not the way that we are most naturally.
Well, and I want to compliment men here for a second, because the way your brain is structured, you have the ability to put something in a box, set it on the shelf, and it's there, but you're not thinking about it. Women, we don't have the same kind of brain structure. So we have a lot of thoughts happening all at the same time that are connected to each other. And that can be horrible to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the neat things about men is when my son was ready to go to Boy Scout camp, I didn't want him to go. I was emotional about it. He was my firstborn. I mean, the kid's 11 years old. Like, it's Boy Scout camp. Come on, mom, let go. Apron strings, And I was just grieving this and, all this stuff. And I talked to my husband about it, and he listened, and it's like, yeah, I know it's hard to let him go. He said, but he needs to do this. He's going to be homesick. He might even be so homesick he throws up. But this is good for him as a man, and he will be fine. He's not going to die. And he needs to go do this. I'm like, oh. And I prayed about it, and the Lord was like, yeah, he needs to go do this. I'm like, okay, now I've got 2 of you and you're bigger. All right, fine. Oh, So I was like, okay. It was a big submission moment for me, because all of my mother genes were saying no, but I also knew what God wanted, and I knew my husband was right. So the kid goes to Boy Scout camp, comes back, and I asked him, how was it? And he says, I was homesick and I didn't throw up, but I thought I might. He said, but what was really cool, Mom, was that God met me in the shower. I was like, what do you mean by that? He went in to take a shower and he hung his towel up on a hook, and somebody hung a cross made out of 2 nails tied with twine on his towel. And that night he led this other kid to Christ.
Oh, wow.
So here's this kid that got saved because my son was in the spot that God probably would have used somebody else, absolutely, but he didn't. And I didn't get in the way of that, And I'm not saying women are, whatever here. This is an example that, I was very emotional, and it could have been, something else that, could be reversed. But I appreciate men's ability in their brain to separate their own feelings about certain things to be able to go do stuff. It's no different than, the fact that 0.02% of our protective services, Army, Navy, police, firefighters are men. They have the ability to put their families and all the stuff they care about in a box to go do the thing that they need to do for their country, for their community, whatever. And I don't think women are, and I'm sorry, ladies, but we don't naturally gravitate to those jobs. And in the Netherlands, where there's been as much freedom of choice of employment as there is anywhere in the universe, men and women gravitate to different job categories naturally.
Yeah.
And so this is actually statistical. It's actually reinforced. And I appreciate that about men. And I don't think there's a lot of people in our culture that are going to say that men are cool right now. Like, it's terrible to see what is happening to men in general verbally out there right now. And I don't think that's a piece of privilege or anybody's better than anybody. We are different. And I think it's okay to acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and props to women as well, because how often when men are absolutely losing their minds over who knows what, and a woman recognizes the feeling and the intensity and the emotion and just comes and calls a timeout, and Danny, just put her hand on mine, and she didn't have to say anything.
Wow.
Got some less than hoped for news about the health of my father this week. And it was difficult. And I really just didn't even have words. And she just walked across the room, sat down beside me and put her hand on mine and spoke so many things without saying a word, because she's emotional more so than not. And she spotted it and she identified it. And I was struggling with it. And she helped me reconcile what was going on in my own heart.
That's awesome.
And you ladies are just wizards at that.
Well, I think we're wired nurturing, we do carry the babies, and there's evidence now of how fetal development affects their brain and emotionality and all of that, like the environment that they're raised in utero. If there's chaos in the home, that has negative outcomes for the infant. So, I think it's beautiful how God created us. We're both made in his image. Yep. So that's powerful.
I happen to be a very emotional male, probably more emotionally self-aware than the average male for lots of different reasons. And one of my good buddies calls me a low functioning woman. I'm not going for that. But even though I am probably higher on the emotional self-awareness scale than the average guy, I'm still logical at my core. And I sometimes have to have somebody call timeout for me.
Yeah. Well, and it probably helps in the field that you're in to have that kind of awareness. Makes you a good therapist. That's awesome. Well, this was great today. Just another awesome day of chatting it up around challenging topics, emotionality, its place, its usefulness, its not, and then what to do with that. So thank you, Kyle, for chiming in with your thoughts today around the adult thing, especially.
Be an adult. Practice more adulting.
Yes, grow up. Let's adult. And if you guys want more information, pop over to our website, greaterimpact.org, and snag our free PDF, 5 Tools to Stop Walking on Eggshells. Have a great rest of your day, and good luck adulting out there. Be blessed.